The phone rang at 2:47 in the morning and Kian Adeyemi-Park did not raise his voice once. He listened. He asked one question, "Is she breathing?" And when the voice on the other end hesitated a second too long, something in his eyes changed. Not anger, not panic, something colder. Something the syndicate would come to regret ever waking up. By sunrise, 7 men who thought they were untouchable would learn that the calmest man in the room is usually the most dangerous one in it. But to understand how a children's nonprofit founder from Lagos ended up married to one of the most powerful men in the world, and how that marriage nearly cost her everything, we have to go back 11 years, to a night neither of them expected to matter at all. September 2015. Lagos was loud that evening, generators humming, laughter spilling from a modest community hall where volunteers were setting up chairs for the launch of a new education initiative. Nadia Okafor moved through the crowd with a clipboard in one hand and sweat on her brow, too busy coordinating volunteers to notice the quiet man in a plain gray shirt standing near the back. She assumed he was a driver waiting for someone. She handed him a folding chair and asked him to help set up the tables. He did. Without complaint, without correcting her. It wasn't until the program director thanked Mr. Adeyemi-Park for his generous donation that Nadia realized the man carrying chairs was the same man who had just quietly funded half the building's renovation. She apologized. He told her not to. "You treated me like a person," he said, "not a wallet. That doesn't happen often." That single sentence would become the foundation of everything that followed. They talked until the volunteers had gone home and the generators had gone quiet. He asked about her nonprofit. She asked about nothing, no business, no net worth, no ambition, just him. And for a man surrounded by people who wanted something from him, that silence around ambition felt like oxygen. 11 years later, that silence had become a marriage. Their home outside Seoul held both worlds at once: jollof rice simmering beside a pot of homemade kimchi, Lunar New Year decorations hanging near Nigerian festive cloth, and a private language between them that blended English, Yoruba, and Korean into something only they understood. Nadia called him letter one ECDK letter one ECD me when she was soft with him, and Opa when she was teasing him. He answered to both like they were the same word. He had built an empire in logistics and technology worth billions. She had built something quieter but no less powerful, a network of schools, clinics, and shelters across 2 continents. Together, they were the kind of couple magazines wrote profiles about, and rivals studied like a puzzle they couldn't solve. Which is exactly why the syndicate believed they'd found the crack. For months, a group of investors, men who operated through shell companies in silence, had tried to force their way into Kian's logistics network. They wanted access to shipping routes that, if compromised, would let them move more than cargo across borders. Kian refused every offer. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply said no calmly, the way he said everything, and moved on with his day. They mistook that calm for weakness. They tried buying out his board members. Kian outmaneuvered them within a week. They tried leaking false stories to the press. He let his lawyers handle it without so much as raising his voice in a boardroom. Every attempt broke against the same wall of quiet, immovable control, until someone inside the syndicate suggested a different target. Not the company, the man, more specifically, the woman beside him. It began small. A car that followed Nadia's SUV a little too closely on her way to a school opening. A stranger asking her assistant oddly specific questions about her schedule. Nadia noticed. She always noticed. It was part of what made her good at protecting the children in her programs. She told Kian everything without fear, the way she always had. Kian listened the way he always did. Quietly. completely. Then he made one phone call, gathered his closest security advisor and two men whose names never appeared on any company documents, and said four words that would define the weeks ahead. Find out who's watching. It didn't take long. A name surfaced that made even Kian go still for the first time in years: Tobias Reyes, his chief operating officer of 6 years. A man who had sat across from Kian in 100 meetings, who had been trusted with confidential logistics routes, financial records, even personal travel schedules. Tobias had been feeding information to the syndicate for over a year, in exchange for a seat at their table once they took control of Kian's empire. Kian didn't confront him immediately. That was the first lesson in understanding a man like Kian Adeyemi-Park. He never moved before he was ready, and he was never ready before he had already won. Instead, he let Tobias keep talking, keep leaking, keep believing he was winning, while quietly, methodically, Kian built a case so complete that when it finally closed, there would be no room left for anyone to run. But the syndicate grew impatient, and impatience made them reckless. They sent Kian one final offer: sign over exclusive access to 3 of his shipping corridors, or certain people close to you would suffer the consequences of his stubbornness. It was meant as a warning. Kian treated it as a confession. He requested a meeting. Just him in a private office downtown, facing 3 men who represented the syndicate's leadership. No lawyers, no bodyguards standing behind him, just Kian in a plain gray suit, the same quiet energy he'd carried since that night in Lagos 11 years earlier. He didn't raise his voice. "If my wife is harmed," he said, looking each of them in the eye, one at a time, "none of you will survive tomorrow. This is the only warning you will ever get. Walk away now." The room went silent. Then one of the men, the one who would come to regret it most, laughed. "You're a businessman," he said, "not a soldier." Kian said nothing else. He simply stood, buttoned his jacket, and left. They should have listened. 4 days later, Nadia was taken. It happened outside one of her clinics on the outskirts of Lagos, in broad daylight, in the 60 seconds between stepping out of her car and reaching the front door. 2 men, a black van, gone before her security detail even registered what had happened. For the syndicate, this was meant to be the final move, the one that would finally bring Kian Adeyemi-Park to his knees. They held her for hours, presenting her with documents to sign, documents that would sign away control of Kian's shipping corridors in exchange for her release. Nadia refused. Even frightened, even alone in a room she didn't recognize, she looked the man guarding her in the eye and said, "You don't know him, and you clearly don't know me either." She was right on both counts. Because while the syndicate celebrated, certain they had finally cornered him, Kian had already anticipated this exact moment. Months of quiet preparation, the case built against Tobias Reyes, the alliances formed with international investigators and financial regulators, the evidence gathered piece by piece, all of it converged in a single, coordinated strike the moment Nadia went missing. Bank accounts connected to the syndicate froze within hours. Shell companies that had operated in shadow for years were suddenly exposed to regulators in 3 countries. Tobias Reyes, mid-celebration, received a call not from his co-conspirators, but from federal investigators standing outside his front door. And the location holding Nadia traced not through luck, but through a financial trail Kian's team had mapped weeks earlier, anticipating exactly this scenario, was surrounded before the sun set. She walked out unharmed, calm, shaken, but unbroken, because she had never doubted, not for 1 second, that he was already coming. The syndicate's leadership was arrested within 72 hours. Tobias Reyes, facing charges of corporate espionage and conspiracy, gave up the remaining names in exchange for leniency he would not receive. The empire they had tried to seize collapsed under the weight of its own corruption, exactly as Kian had quietly engineered it to. He never raised his voice once through any of it. That night, once Nadia was finally home, safe, wrapped in a blanket with a bowl of jollof rice she barely touched, Kian sat beside her and said nothing for a long time. Then, softly in the private language only they shared, he whispered, Saranghi, letter 1 CDK letter 1 ECD me. I love you, my wife. She rested her head on his shoulder and said the only thing that mattered. I always knew you were coming. Today, Kian and Nadia live between Seoul and Lagos, their foundation now supporting young entrepreneurs and vulnerable children across both continents. Their story became something people whispered about in business circles and cried about in comment sections, not because of the danger they survived, but because of what it revealed: that the quietest people are often the most powerful. That loyalty, tested in its darkest hour, doesn't break, it reveals what was always there. He gave them one chance to walk away. They chose wrong. He never gave a second.